know that this is taking place. Can I remind you to have your mobiles on silent or vibrate, except for we have a member tonight who may have to take an emergency call, so if it does ring, you are excused to take it. Apologies for absence.
I received apologies from Councillor Harper.
Substitute member, please. Yes.
I'm here for Councillor Harper.
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Blackmore is absent, and I'm substituting for her as well. Thank you.
We have two urgent items on the papers tonight. They're actually not independent items, they're part of items already there. You accept that these are acceptable, members? You should have had one, I think, by email earlier. One is on your desk tonight. Is that agreeable? Thank you. I don't see any visiting members. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? Yes, Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to inform you that I remain on call, hence I'm even more haggard and hollow-eyed than last time. So I may have to go out quickly, and there are a few things going on at the moment, so I apologise in advance if I need to leave the room. Thank you.
Are there any disclosures of lobbying? No, there are none. To consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. We only, excuse me, we only have minutes in part 2. We could take them at the end of the first minutes if nobody has an amendment or any changes to make. So we'll do that. Okay, thank you. Apologies. So, minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of October. I'll take it page by page. I'm sorry, I've managed to get through most of the day without coughing on the back of a cold, but it's obviously going to play up. Page 1. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. It's got me down as being present, but it didn't say that I was a substitute for anyone. I can't remember who it was.
Do we know?
I'm not sure. I wasn't clerk in that meeting, but I can find out and correct it. It was you, was it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you both for pointing that out. Page 2. Page 3. Yes.
With regards to item 12, it says both myself and Councillor M. Burton asked for their dissent to be noticed. I think it was actually Councillor D. Burton.
Can we just make that amendment? Thank you. 2, 3, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Can I sign that as a true and accurate record, please? Thank you. And if you move to the end of your papers, then please.
And item 9 as well, because there's 2 sets of minutes.
Find something there. No. Yes, no.
Oh, we're doing part 2 as well.
So if you look on page 94, are there any amendments to that? No? So can I sign those as a true record as well? And page 95, part 2 minutes. This is dreadful. I think my voice is suddenly going to disappear. Can I get those signed, please, as an accurate record? I'm very sorry, members.
It's all right, it's webcast.
know where I got it from too. Right, if you turn to page 7 to 13, I'll go through it by page 7, 8, page 9, 10. Yes, sorry, come in.
Yeah, on page 10, I was just wondering what progress is made on the disposal of that piece of land.
We can't do that now, can we?
Don't do that to the rising.
Yeah. Sorry, no, I know. When I can talk, we don't do matters arising, but if you want an answer on that, I'm sure one of the officers will talk to you about it if you ask them outside of the meeting. Thank you. Page 10, 11, 12 and 13. Can I sign those as an accurate record, members? Thank you very much. Minutes. As far as I'm aware, we have no presentation of petitions, do we? And no questions and answers. Thank you very much. Committee work programme, if I come to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You'll see in the committee work programme that it's currently showing no less than 12 reports for January's meeting, and I'm pleased to say that some of those will now slip, so we've got a rather more manageable meeting in January. So the ones that are not going to be going to January are, first of all, number 2, new ways of working, and that will go to February. Number 5, phase 3 public realm funding, because of delays with that scheme, that looks likely to go to March now. Number 6, the digital strategy, which you heard about just before the meeting, will be going in February. Number 8, medium-term financial strategy, that's actually a duplication. The report is coming to the meeting this evening. It's on the agenda for later. And numbers 11 and 12, Union Street and Brunswick Street, will go to the meeting in February and will be combined as one report. So that leaves 6 reports for January, as I say, which should be a bit more manageable, and it helps to spread the reports out over the remaining meetings of this municipal year. Thank you.
Councillor Cox, you were first.
It's a very small matter. I've just come out of our SPST where we were looking at our work programme. I looked at the top where it says Chi Committee. I've just come in here, and if you look at the top of this work programme, we're still in Chi Committee. So with all the other bits and pieces, I'm sure we'll get it all ironed out. But,
Councillor Bryce.
I spotted the same thing. And also property strategy is Jan 17. Is that a typo or is that... Yep.
As it happens, I have suggested that we actually send out an amended sheet. We can do it via email to everybody, just so that you've got it, so we can make that amendment in it as well. Thank you. So we go immediately to agenda item 13, which you will find on page 15 to 55, Strategic Plan 2015 to 20 and the 2018-19 refresh. Mrs Woodhouse, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So in July, the committee agreed to a refresh of the strategic plan for 2018-19. Attached to Appendix A is the refreshed version ready for consideration by the service committees. The reason why you have a separate copy circulated is because the original copy I put on the agenda had track changes. Helpfully, Modern accepts track changes when it uploads documents to agendas. So there is no difference other than you can see what's been changed. So I thought for clarity, I'd give you both. One version with the changes accepted and one with tracked, so you can see which bits have been updated. The refresh so far consists of an update to the statistics in the context of for each priority and updates to the we will sections. So, for example, where we've adopted a plan or strategy, it's now about delivering that plan or strategy. The committee tonight has asked to consider the refresh plan and approve it for circulation to the service committees. And I also seek approval from you for retaining the current 3 priority action areas following the workshop with members, whether that is acceptable, that we retain the 3, so a clean and safe environment, a home for everyone, and regenerating the town centre as 3 priorities for 2018-19. Thank you.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy to go along with the revisions. However, on the respecting the character and heritage of our borough narrative, when it's talking about delivering the plans, looking at the introduction and then looking at the plans it's talking about, I think there is a glaring gap where the Local Biodiversity Action Plan, the LBAP, goes in, because that is the signed-off, agreed strategy of this borough to address biodiversity issues, which is in the second line. So I suggest that we incorporate Maidstone Borough Council Local Biodiversity Action Plan, because it's been properly signed off and it has targets and so on to deliver, and it's a key element of the local plan.
Is that seconded? Because that's a definite suggestion. Is that seconded? Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak to that particularly? Right, because I think you need a clear direction. So can I have a vote, please? A show of hands is fine. People who accept that as an amendment into the document. It's not an amendment, it's an addition to. Apologies. 12 those against? 2. And abstentions? And 1 abstention. That's clearly carried. Thank you. And Mrs Woodhouse, so that's clear, isn't it? Does anybody else wish to speak? Thank you. Councillor Atkinson. Sorry.
The light came on, but nothing happened. Right, on page 24, it says women are expected to live 3 years longer than men. Well, that's the same throughout the country. I wonder if we really need to put that in for something specifically for Maidstone. And then the other point I wish to make is on page 26. It says travel in and around the borough by car can be difficult. Well, it's not just by car, it's by any vehicle. And I wonder if or on foot, yes, that's harder now, especially from Fant, than it used to be, after the ridiculous system. So I wonder if we could either replace the phrase by car with in a vehicle, or simply delete the words by car, because it's just really difficult travelling through the town. So does anyone, do people agree that should be done? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. On page 29, where we've got the hierarchical chart of the strategic plan, can you just enlighten me as to what that empty box is supposed to be and who's sitting in it?
Mrs Woodhouse?
And also where the 2 adjacent boxes are supposed to be connected to.
If I could, sorry, the page at 29 I'm actually proposing be deleted. It's the Maidstone Local Plan flowchart. Oh, to page 28. Right, okay. So, I think, the one that's been deleted was the commercialisation strategy, because it's been replaced with the housing and investment strategy, or now housing regeneration strategy. So that's why that's been deleted. And what was the other question? Which other one?
You'll notice on that page there's an empty box that doesn't say anything. It's not being deleted and it's not connected to anything. And then the housing and investment strategy isn't connected to anything. And the asset management plan isn't connected to anything.
Yeah. If there was an issue, I had to get, this is a design document, and I had to get it put back into Word. When it was put back into Word, things went missing and went a little bit awry, and I didn't have the technology I didn't really want to waste the design team's time in going and redoing a strategy map. So perhaps I should have been clearer. The missing box is commercialisation, so that will go and that box will be deleted. The whole box will be deleted. Housing and investment strategy, will be probably linked to the medium-term financial strategy and the housing strategy, and the asset management plan is under the medium-term financial strategy as well. I can circulate you a proper copy of the plan if that would be helpful, but it's not largely changed from last time, so if you go online you can see our current map, but there was a bit of an issue with the artwork, which will be corrected when you get your final version in February.
I'm sorry, Councillor Atkinson. I thought the way Councillor McLaughlin's hand went up that it was related to what you'd been saying. Mrs Woodhouse, do you want to respond to Councillor Atkinson? I'm minded, I have to say, because that's got quite wide implications, what you're saying, to actually raise it with SPS&T, because what we're being asked to do really is say, yes, OK, to go to the service committees. I mean, maybe I should have done that in the first place, and I apologise, but I do think that we can forward what you've said through to SPS&T, and probably they need to have a discussion there, because that is quite a significant change to wording in there. Just a moment. Councillor Atkinson, would you accept that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I accept that. It's a good idea. Thank you.
Councillor Hull.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to absolutely support Councillor Atkinson, because I think, if anything, it's pedestrians and cyclists who are the second-class citizens in this town. You know, try crossing a road, wait for those lights to change, where it just gives the priority to cars all the time, and you're absolutely trapped in central reservations, you're there in the fumes. We talk about, we will commit to delivering the walking and cycling strategy, so therefore I think we should quite strongly indicate in the opening narrative that we see all forms of transport, whether it be in a vehicle or on foot or on a cycle, as equally important. So I think a reference to SPST would be in order. Thank you.
Members, is that agreed, that we make a reference to SPS&T, because that is where that particular issue should be firmly discussed? Is that agreed, members? Thank you. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. I think I raised these concerns last time about the focus this document has on the town centre, and while we acknowledge in the paragraph around respecting the character of our largely rural borough, I don't think that's reflected enough as a priority. So I'll open that discussion point up. Maybe I'm just in a minority of one. I think my points, because we have the resident survey appended, although we don't really have a point talking to it, I do think there's quite a few things to flag there. I've already raised with officers my concern about the weighting. So when you conduct a survey, it's often not representative of the audience you are seeking it to be. And in this sample, you have a very low number of folks aged, especially males, aged 18 to 24, and they have been upweighted by a value of 8.3, which then I believe, so 12 participants therefore account for 100 participants within the data set. Is that correct?
That is correct, and you will be aware from previous discussions that we don't have a cap on weighting, for example. So we could say we will only weight it by a maximum amount, but we don't have that. So that's a discussion we could have. We're also quite happy to share with you unweighted results as well. And the weighting we've used is standard. It's standard practice. But I'm happy to go through with you in more detail, and I did receive your questions. I'll pass them on to my officer, and she'll come back to you with those answers. And then the other thing I would mention is we have offered to each group a briefing on the resident survey, because as you rightly point out, it's been appended because there's information on the priorities, but the resident survey itself is a separate item. So we will be taking, we've offered briefing sessions with each group, and we'll be doing a member workshop in February, and then there'll be a report coming forward to this committee as part of the communication engagement strategy. So don't fear, it's not, we've just pulled out the bits that are relevant for this, and then we'll be bringing a much fuller report with a lot more detail in.
Thank you. And I wanted to raise those points offline. I do think it's important, though, because obviously the scale of upweighting is such that if you decided not to do that practice, and generally in the research industry we would say upweight by no more than 2, then obviously you're taking about 80 people out of the survey results. Probably not big enough on a sample of 2,350 to make a huge difference, but it may make, you know, a percentage point or two difference on some of the questions where you're filtered. So I think, you know, if you're diving down into some of the subgroups that have been laid out on the table, I think we'd check that point first, wouldn't we, before we get into the nitty-gritty. So I think that's points well made, and thank you for your responses. I think more generally, if we are going to look at the top-line data that's here, I think there are some figures worth flagging. So on page 37, to what extent do you agree or disagree that Maidstone Borough Council provides good value for money? Well, in the industry, we would tend to net those top two boxes, strongly agree, tend to agree, and it's quite disappointing to see that that's at 30%. You know, yeah, we don't have a benchmark because we haven't run the question in this format again, but I think we'd all agree that that's potentially, you know, quite disappointing. It's nice to see that people feel that fairly well informed, given the efforts that have been made around the Borough magazine. I think we'd be disappointed if that wasn't where it was. I think the point really that I want to bring you on to is really when we look at priorities, and it's very clear that priority 2 is key. 66%, two-thirds of the sample, providing a clean and safe environment. 26%, around 1 in 4, a home for everyone, but only 8%, rounded up to 9%, so less than 1 in 10, saying regenerating the town centre is a priority. And maybe that reflects the point I made earlier, that the majority of our borough is of rural nature, and maybe we need to reflect that when we do look at our strategic plan. Have we actually thought about how we could have other priorities in there rather than just limiting to these three main ones, because I think we're getting a clear signal from respondents, participants, that maybe there is more there for us to think about. When we look at the data, particularly on the town centre, I think we do see that actually there's quite a lot of positivity there, and I think that's good. I think folks are saying, you know, yep, there's plenty of places I want to go, there's plenty of entertainment there, and actually the main concern people seem to have are empty shops. So I think, you know, in terms of that as a priority, maybe we need to think about, well, can we deliver against that main concern that folks have? And therefore, when we talk about regenerating the town centre and having that as one of our central pillars, is that really relevant? So thank you for tolerating my long speech. Thank you.
But Councillor Bryce, is there a particular change you wish to... I mean, have you got a word... I mean, is there a particular change you want made? You've said about the rural, but I mean,
okay, I would propose to take out the third priority being regenerating the town centre, and make it more borough-wide, because I think folks are replaying to us that actually that's not such a big priority, and the things that we've kind of, you know, questioned them about, which are concerns for them, they've actually replayed that they're quite positive about the town centre. So I'm thinking, do we need to have that as a third priority?
Does anybody else wish to second that? That's not seconded at all. Can I say, Councillor Bryce, that the fact that we've got 3 top priorities doesn't negate every other priority that is in the document, but it does mean with modest finance at the moment that we clearly have to target, and the town centre is in there because whether we accept it or not, it is primarily the driver of Maidstone's economy, and it is the driver for the rural economy too. If the town centre fails, the economy across the borough fails, and I think everybody was in agreement last year, I think everybody was in agreement that actually the town was not looking like the county town of Kent, and if we were going to lever in the money we needed to lever in, we had to show that we were putting emphasis on it too, and the fact that we did that has levered money in, but we're not home and dry yet. That's the issue. And we're talking about a refresh. And in a refresh, my understanding of a refresh is that you do not change your top priorities, otherwise you're going to rewrite the document as such. So I think we hear what you say, Councillor Bryce, very clearly, and we are not putting out a message that we are ignoring the rural service centres, villages, the rural economy. Far from it, but we do have to target, and it looks as though we're agreeing I hope, because we're going to come to a vote shortly, I have not forgotten you, Councillor Perry, on keeping the three prioritised areas. You've been very patient, Councillor Perry, and you did actually indicate second, and I'm sorry, it's quite clear I am not back to normal yet. So please come.
That's fine, Madam Chairman, don't worry. I think a lot of it has actually already been said. I understand where Councillor Bryce is coming from, and I always support, as you know, rural issues. But, and it is a very big but, I actually happen to think the town centre and the town does symbolise the borough. And I think this is what you were saying, and I do have a lot of sympathy with that as well. And I think it is very, very important. And I think the town has been looking at, dare I say, it's a bit tired in the past, and I think it does. I mean, a lot of effort has been made to improve it, and I do appreciate all the work that's been done. I think Jubilee Square, I think Remembrance Square, and the work on that has been absolutely, brilliant, and I think that's really, really helped. The people who made that decision in the past, I take my hat off, so I think that was a very good decision. I just come back really also to what Councillor Bryce is saying. Just to the survey, I found it a bit depressing reading, actually. I'm sorry, Mrs Woodhouse. It's not you're the messenger. You're not. I know, and you mustn't shoot the messenger. But so I was just wondering. I think you did describe what the next steps with this, but I do think it's quite important that we follow up the survey, because there are areas in here which aren't very, very good, and I think we do need to try and improve. I think that's really what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Councillor Perry, as leader of the Conservative group, and I don't think the three smaller groups have managed. The Liberal Democrats have had a session on these figures, and of course we're disappointed with some of them too. But what we said was you can't necessarily take a figure just like that, and that what we needed was for the officers to get under the skin of those figures and be able to give us some feedback about what had produced, if we can discover it, what had produced them. Can I urge you, Councillor Perry, perhaps to try and get that meeting in place for your group, and if the three smaller groups can get together, because we did as a group find it very useful to have a presentation about these figures in advance of this meeting, and it was offered to everybody. I know it's very difficult to get it together, but a lot of what you're saying, you can be very, very open in a group meeting, and then bring things collectively to the committee meetings. I would suggest that it would be quite useful, because you can ask some quite in-depth questions there. So if you can, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I understand that. It's just getting a group together and fixing up the meat. That was just the more difficult part, so it's the logistics. But I fully understand what you're saying, and obviously we'll do that. But I was just raising it here because I think it's important that in this public forum that we do raise these issues, because it is a little worrying when you see the very low percentages. But yes, it's on the cards to arrange the meeting.
Yes, and what you've articulated here tonight is exactly what we articulated as a group. So have I missed anybody? Yes, Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. Am I right in saying that this survey was done in July? Sorry.
It's done in July and August.
And the reason why I asked that is I believe our publication didn't start going out till after this survey. So I think the next time we do that, or perhaps through our digital strategy, we might have an impromptu survey that gives us how people are now looking at it, and indeed there might be something that can be done. We'll see that it's much better. Now we have the in-house magazine. But thank you very much for a good report.
Members, nobody else has indicated to speak. You will find the recommendations on page 15 of the report. Do I need to read them out, or have you all read them? Are you happy for me to take both together? Thank you. So could I have a show of hands to approve? Oh, I always forget the seconder, sorry. To propose that, right. I don't know whose hand went up first. I'll take yours, Councillor Cox, and yours second, Councillor Gooch. Thank you. We've got a Can I please have a show of hands for those in favour? It is. I can't see Councillor Bryce. That is.
Oh, no, it's not. Sorry, 14.
All right, thank you. Those against? 1. And no abstentions. Thank you, members. So we move to agenda item 14, which is pages 56 to 68, and this will be introduced by the Chief Exec. Mrs. Broom, if you wish to lead.
Thank you and good evening, members. This report sets out that we have been invited by the other members of the Thames Gateway Kent Partnership to join that partnership, and recommends that on balance that would be a good thing to do, and also puts forward that if you agree with that, who our representative on the board should be. There's quite a lot of detail in the report about the objectives and the opportunities that joining that partnership would give to us, so I won't repeat all of that. But if you want some specific references, and you should particularly look at paragraphs 1.5 and 2.5. I think to sum up the advantages, the crux of them is that by joining such a partnership, our voice would potentially be heard more loudly and more widely. And I'm thinking particularly of some of the things that are going to come about in the immediate near future. For example, the consultation on the London plan and the consequences of that potentially in terms of the impact for housing and employment in the county and in our borough. We would have the opportunity to participate in a wider group, to learn from the others and to influence and be exposed, I think, to some broader opportunities. And there I'm particularly thinking about the Thames Estuary Commission and the Productivity Corridor for the Creative Arts. And it would also give us access to expertise from the Thames Gateway Kent Partnership team. Not participating risks being marginalised, and we can already see that other organisations, and in that I would count the County Council and the Sustainability and Transformation Partnership with respect to health, are engaging with clusters of district councils rather than individual district councils on a number of matters. And a couple of examples recently have been the growth and infrastructure framework for the county as a whole, and the plan for healthcare provision going forward. So I think we need to look at both sides of the coin, and then the judgment needs to come as to whether or not the subscription level of £28,000 a year would make it worthwhile. I think we can look at this from a theoretical perspective, which is what the report does, but the proof of the pudding would be in the eating. And so what I'm suggesting here is that we should join, we should review, and the constitution of the partnership, if we were to join, allows exit as well by giving 6 months' notice. So there's the opportunity that if the potential didn't materialise, then we'd have an exit strategy if that's what we wanted to do. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Garland, you were first.
Thank you, Chairman. I think absolutely we should join this. It'd be absolutely stupid not to join it. The fee of £28,000 is small change indeed for the benefits that that undoubtedly would accrue from belonging to the Thames Gateway Partnership. The Chief Executive has outlined all the reasons why we should join. All the reasons we shouldn't join, I don't believe exist. And I think it is absolutely worthwhile trying this out. And I think we will find that it is of huge benefit to Maidstone in general. I don't think there's much more to be said on it. So I move the recommendations.
I had Councillor Harvey next, and I've just got a feeling that, so Councillor Harvey, come in, and I think you wanted a second. Yes, I think you were going to move it, actually. So with your indulgence, I will come back to you, but Councillor Harvey, do you wish to second? Do you wish to speak at this point? No, okay. I have Councillor Borton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm afraid I disagree with Councillor Garland on this one here, which might be astonishing, but it is actually the case. Reading the report, I found it very hard to quantify anything, and it's very little sort of tangible, apart from the £28,000 a year fee to join, which is a substantial amount of money when we're looking for a number of cuts, basically, in certain parts of the council. And the reason for my issues are as follows, really. 1.4, obviously, the priorities of the Thames Gateway Kent partnership mention in all four priorities North Kent. Now, I've never considered Maidstone to be geographically a part of North Kent and to have much in common with a lot of the boroughs and districts such as Dartford and Gravesham that are in this partnership already. So I do have concerns that we are very much going to be the odd one out. And while I can understand that they're looking to expand and they're looking for Maidstone to join, I can understand why they're a partnership which would like to expand. We've got to look at it the other way around to think, is this the best thing for Maidstone to do, and is this partnership going to enhance the character and the culture of Maidstone, which we all know we have at the moment. And I do have concerns that the focus will be on a geographical area to the north of us, and some of the benefits we might see will actually go to that geographic area that borders the Thames estuary, hence the name of the partnership, rather than feeding down into our borough, and particularly the south of our borough, which does not. The people of Marsden, people of Staplehurst and people of Headcorn have very different needs and very different communities to the sort of Dartford and Gravesham, Gravesend town centre as well. And reading through the report, this doubt remained with me throughout, and I accept that this might, although there's absolutely no guarantee of this whatsoever, provide Maidstone with greater opportunities when it comes to sort of partnership funding or bidding for certain projects or whatever. I do accept that, but I do worry about how much of that money, or how much, which should it come to the Thames Gateway, would feed itself directly into Maidstone Borough. And it's for that reason that I'm afraid to say the report is so lacking in quantifiable detail that I cannot just give what is in effect sort of grant sort of the consent for us to join this partnership, because I'd have liked this council to have gone back to the Thames Gateway Thames partnership and said, right, you're demanding £28,000 of our money a year. What are you actually going to deliver for taxpayers in Maidstone? Because I cannot justifiably go and knock on a door or speak to a resident in Fant and say, look, this is where £28,000 of Maidstone Council's taxpayers' money is going, and this is what we are getting back in return. And until that question's answered, I'm afraid I can't support us joining this.
Chief Exec, do you want to?
So firstly, is Maidstone part of North Kent? I think was the question. And I think I would remind you of the consideration that we gave to this last September, in fact, when we were considering whether or not to work more closely with the local authorities that are located to the north of us. And I think on that occasion, we had a lot of debate about the different geographies relating to different characteristics. I think it is clear that there is some resonance in terms of what is called a functional economic area, but economic geography, essentially, between our borough and the authorities to the north of us. And that is demonstrated through all sorts of things, including the travel to work characteristics. My guess is, though, that we could, if we chose to, make any argument that we liked about any part of the economy. Nevertheless, I do think that the links to the area to the north of us are strong. It's true, though, for health economy that the links to the west are strong. And for our housing areas, that the links to Tunbridge and Morling and to Ashford are strong. What tipped the balance in our previous conversations was that the East Kent Partnership did not wish us to join. The West Kent Partnership did not wish us to join. And frankly, it didn't matter how many times you asked me the question about whether or not we had spoken to those authorities, the answer remained the same. And I have heard nothing in the intervening time to indicate any difference to that. And so, I think the issue becomes, do we want to be part of a wider partnership or do we not? Do we want to have the strength of the collaboration and the strength and weight to have with us when we're, for example, debating in the Kent and Medway Economic Partnership, or do we not? And ultimately, that's your for your judgment. I would just point out, my advice to you is that there would be strength in becoming part of, in this case, the the Thames Gateway Kent Partnership. So we can argue about best geography. We also have to take into account the reality and the practicalities. No guarantee that this will deliver impact or any money. You're right, there is no guarantee. The chances are higher, though, in my opinion, if we are part of the partnership than if we are not. And I'll just give you an illustration of how schemes from Maidstone have been prioritised in other arenas and the impact of not being part of a partnership. So when we have bid via the LEP for transport improvements and investment in transport infrastructure in the borough, we have, in my opinion, lost out because we have not been part of a wider group of boroughs. And so on independent assessment, our scheme, for example, for improvements to Junction 7 of the M20 and the area around it, came out ranked in the top 5. By the time all sorts of other considerations had been taken into consideration, our scheme had gone to below 20, and we did not get the funding. It's my opinion that in those sorts of circumstances, if we can hammer out being in a high priority position as part of a cluster, we will stand a better chance in those prioritisation processes. There will be a quid pro quo. We would obviously need to support the other members of the partnership if their schemes were of greater value than ours. But the practicalities are such that voices are louder and your case is stronger if you have other people to support you in those arenas. That's practical experience from being in those places. I agree with you. I have not quantified what the impact would be because my crystal ball isn't good enough to be able to do that. But so what I'm asking you to consider, and I think the report is honest in that respect, is to identify the potential and the downside of not participating. And you may come to the conclusion that it's not worth that, a net position of £20,000 a year. And if you do, then that's fine. We'll continue to proceed in the way that we are at the moment. And so I'm not pretending I can quantify it. It's just, that's not the point at all. The point is the opportunity and the option. And to give what I'm proposing is to do that for a period of time, evaluate it, and if it hasn't produced the potential, then we don't continue to participate.
Come back briefly.
In that case, if we were to join, then I think what we need to add to recommendations is a point in time, maybe a year, in which we say, is this working for us or not, and make a decision from there. But just to come back, because we've got to give 6 months' notice, and it's not in the recommendations. That's why I suggest that just as perhaps something to throw out there. But just coming back on a few points, obviously when this committee discussed in 2016, it was discussing very much devolution, and it was discussing sort of councils working together, because that was very much on the radar at the time. And I think we all agree now that that's not on the radar at the time. So at the moment, just because the government has changed. So I think what we can sort of safely say is this is very much different discussions what we were having back there, and because for those reasons, and the prospect of sort of further devolution, I think, has diminished in the last 18 or so months, and than it certainly has. I appreciate this point on sort of partnerships, which does sort of bring, they do bring some benefit, but of course what we need to do is we need to ensure that with all our neighbours we are getting on well. And obviously where we are the borough that sits at the heart of Kent, geographically, we do have to have sort of links towards the north, the west and the east. And that's why my concern about just sort of arbitrarily going, yes, we'll join the North Kent group, even though our travel to work, as was mentioned, it's strong with Medway, it's strong with Swale, but it's not strong with Dartford and it's not strong with Gravesham, yet it's strong, as you mentioned, with Ashford and Tunbridge and Morlin as well. So, and Tunbridge Wells to the south of the borough. So it does work both ways. Just returning to this sort of the point that was made on sort of on funding for individual projects as a result of being part of the cluster. If the chief executive is able to sort of substantiate further that Junction 7 proposal, that it was as a result of not being in a cluster that we lost out on the money, I'd be very sort of interested to see it, to be honest, because I think if that was the case, it would have been useful to have that in writing for consideration before we got to this meeting. But ultimately, it is, as you say, it is something to weigh up the financial cost against the opportunity available. And I just think we're taking it. I think in times when we're having to sort of be really, really tight with what we spend, I remain uncomfortable that giving £28,000 a year to the Thames Gateway Kent Partnership is the right way to go. And I'm afraid those doubts remain.
I think you've made your point very clearly. Right. Yes.
Maybe just to pick up on your point about review, that is covered in the report. It's in paragraph 3.1. And I've suggested there is that it should be conducted after 2 years. And the reason for that is that I think to do so after one year, I just think it's too short a period of time. And so hence the suggestion here. If you think about the scale of the initiatives that are listed in the report, so, for example, issues to do with the local plan or the Thames Estuary Commission, they are large strategic projects, and those sorts of things tend to move reasonably slowly. And I would just like to challenge the point when budgets are very tight, you should, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but it sounds like to me you were saying you should sort of contract and become more inward-looking. And I have to say that I don't, my advice would be not to do that. I think to look outward, to be visionary, to be engaging, to collaborate is more important. And there are many ways to do it, as you've suggested, and you can do it informally as well as formally. And maybe just to pick up a couple of other things, I think being involved in a partnership like this doesn't preclude keeping good relationships with our neighbours all the way round. I don't think it is an arbitrary consideration to go into or to consider going into this partnership.
All right. I have Councillor McLaughlin, Firmer, Butler, Bryce and Perry who wish to speak. I don't want to curtail debate, but can we be reasonably succinct, please? Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 points to make, questions to ask, really. This grouping was formed, it says, in 2001. I'd just like to know why it's only now that we're being invited to join. What's changed? What's brought this about? A little bit of background to that would help. Secondly, on paragraph 2.9, the second bullet, it talks about 1.2 million new workers coming into the production corridor, I think it's described as. And I worry about, although we all like to see economic growth, I worry about the impact on housing that might have in Maidstone when you look at the congestion of houses along the Thames estuary. and the growth prospects for where those houses are going to go. And thirdly, much is said of the chair of this organisation coming from the private sector. You don't actually tell us who that chair is. It would be interesting to know. So those are my 3 points.
Thank you. Chief Exec.
I think some of my reply with respect to why would we be asked now, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the partnership itself. I think there are a number of contributory reasons. So in 2001, in the period between then and now, we have been part of other partnerships that no longer exist. For example, the Channel Corridor Partnership. So partnerships that were set up with the purpose of achieving economic development. So in the past, we've been part of other partnerships, and therefore maybe this one wasn't quite as fundamental as it is now. But I think the most important, more recent factor is that we have been working closely with the North Kent local authorities, with Dartford, Gravesham, but particularly Medway and Swale, because they are part of the same functional economic area as us. And so I think that has now, the fact that we've developed those informal relationships has led them to believe that we would be valuable partners in the Thames Gateway Kent Partnership. That is certainly the opinion expressed to me by my counterparts in those organisations. Councillor Borton asked a question earlier, why didn't we ask or demand, I think you said, information from the other partners as to the benefits? Well, we did do that through a series of very specific questions, and the answers to that are reflected in the narrative of the report. So I think the more recent factors are we are seen as a valuable contributor and relevant to the work of the authorities that are to the north of us. In terms of the production corridor and job creation, I think we're fortunate in Kent in that the unemployment levels here are relatively low. What we do see, though, is that we have a low-wage economy. So if there are ways in which we can increase the number of jobs that are better paid, then I think we should be endeavouring to do that. And to make a direct link between that and housing in Maidstone, I think is a very difficult thing to do. Our projections clearly are based on a much wider range of factors than that. So I don't think I can answer the question that you posed in the way that you've asked it. I do have the name of the chair, but I don't have it to hand, I'm afraid. I can provide it to you if you would like later. I would hope that the name of the person isn't necessarily going to be the most important factor in your decision.
Sorry, can I just come back on the housing issue? Yes, we'd like to see higher paid jobs and more of them. I just wonder whether the consideration as to what effect that might have on the future housing in Maidstone has been given. That's really the point of the question. I suspect it hasn't, but I think it could be a factor that wouldn't necessarily be positive.
I think what I said was that I think it's more complex, and so the way in which we calculate housing need across, as you know, across the whole of the area, takes into consideration many factors, and pinpointing the work done in the production corridor within that, I think, would be a difficult cause and effect, direct cause and effect judgment to make. So I wasn't trying to avoid your question. I think I was saying that it's more complex than you seem to be suggesting.
Councillor Firman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't want to prolong discussions, but I just wanted to kind of counter some of the negative comments we had. I'm very positive about this. I think it's an absolutely excellent thing for us to be doing. I'm very grateful to the Chief Executive and the leader for the work you've done behind the scenes, kind of making putting this report together and making this possible. I think it's not just a case of wanting to be part of it. I think it's a case of needing to be. We've seen the devolution agenda, and we've seen where the Chancellor is putting money across the country, and it's very much not in favour of smaller groupings. It's quite the opposite, and I think we have a lot of opportunities by working with our neighbours for the future of the borough.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. I do believe that we should be in a partnership. Has anyone else been invited at the same time as Maidstone? No. It would be more palatable to me if it was called the Thames and Medway Gateway Partnership.
I'm sure that we've all got a personal view on how we might want to nuance the name. And I suppose just one point to make in response to that, and that is that the part of Essex that's on the northern side of the Thames and the part of London that is immediately adjacent to both ourselves and Essex have their own Thames Gateway Partnership. And so there is also an overarching strategic grouping. So my guess is that even if we all thought it was a brilliant idea to change to Thames and Medway, we would have little influence over being able to make such a change.
Councillor Bryce.
So I was just Googling the Thames Gateway Partnership to see if I could give colleagues the name of the chair, the chief exec I've got, but I don't think that's who you're alluding to, is it? It's somebody else. Look, I think these kinds of groups can be very useful and you know, obviously add depth and resources to our wonderful economic development team. And I'm sure, you know, I'd like to hear from them. I'm sure they would think this is a good idea, and I tend to 100% support what they want to do. But I think coming back to taxpayers' money, because it's taxpayers' money we're spending at the end of the day, when I look at the objectives for this group, as outlined in this document, positioning North Kent, regeneration in North Kent, contributing fully to North Kent's regeneration, making the case for improved transport in North Kent. And I think whilst there is an economic argument there, that it's obvious from those you know, that phrasing, that they're not talking about an economic area. This is talking about the geography. And the geography of this borough is that we are not in North Kent. And this is devolution by stealth, another North Kent partnership that we're a part of, to add to the list of organisations when we discussed devolution before, that weighted the argument to say, well, we're already a member of all of these North Kent clubs, so we should just keep going down that road. So I'm afraid I think it's devolution by stealth. I think it leads to us being presented with the fait accompli. I would love to support it because I think on paper there's a lot of benefits, but I'm afraid that I can't spend taxpayers' money when so much of this is focused on the geography of North Kent. And you've made some wonderful arguments, so it's a difficult decision, but it's taxpayers' money. And with regard to the £20,000 point, I agree with you. You know, we are doing an awful lot, and I commend all of you for your hard work in terms of, you know, making, you know, finding other ways to you know, make up budget shortfall. I think what Councillor Borton is remembering is when we sat in this chamber a few months ago and we were looking at shortfalls and moving £20,000 here, £20,000 here, because it did make the difference between an officer, you know, having a role or not. So I think what we're trying to convey is we don't, however small the pot of money, you know, we don't make those decisions lightly and say it's only £20,000. We know that you know, money can be well used within our councils. So not really a question for you to come back, but just some comments. So thank you, though.
Firstly, I can tell you who the chair is, and that is Rob Bennett. He's the person who wrote the letter to us, so he's the chair of the partnership. And then just to respond to the comment that's been made several times, this is about North Kent, it's not about us. One of the things that was helpfully said in the correspondence that Mr Bennett sent us, and I've set this out in paragraph 1.6 of the report, and that's a recognition that there would be a range of practicalities and constitutional amendments to work through if we made the decision to join, including how the partnership's work programme could be shaped to take account of Maidstone's particular needs and requirements. So I'd just highlight that because it may have slipped by your notice.
And once again, Councillor Perry, you've been very patient and you're the last name on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It is finely balanced argument. I do recognise that. However, it is not just about economics. That is important. I'm not denying it, but it's not. It's cultural and geographic as well. And it does send a signal that we want to be part of North Kent. And when I read the paper and I got to para 3.3, I have to say this, as a football fan, I felt a bit like a Millwall supporter, because nobody loves us, and perhaps we don't care, but it's not exactly where I want to be. The benefits seem to me to be, at this stage, rather intangible. And so it is difficult, really, to strongly support this. The other thing that makes me slightly nervous is the cost. Because we quote the 20,000 or 28,000 or 20,000, whatever it is, but I assume there would be staff involvement here as well, officer involvement, and that has a cost issue as well, which the paper doesn't refer to. And the other thing that rather interests me was when I saw the partners, the current partners, one of them was Blue Water. And I wonder what our town centre people would think of us joining a partnership with Blue Water, who possibly are a major rival to our town centre. So I'm struggling with this. I really am. And the other thing I know we've had previous discussions on this, and I always argued that if we did join, it should be for 2 years, maybe max, or try it. But I noticed that that's been discarded. And you've got this 6-month notice, but are there penalties attached to that as well? Because often in agreements such as this, there is a penalty for withdrawing. So nothing is in the paper that. So I feel as the paper's currently presented, I really find it difficult to support. I understand the economic reasons, but I don't like the direction of being in North Kent. I don't see, certainly the people south of Maidstone do not see themselves as part of North Kent. Indeed, I still see myself as part of the Maidstone Rural District Council, so that's an old bit of history. But and a lot of, certainly my residents would feel the same. So I struggle to support this as it currently has been presented. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
So I believe I did make reference to the fact that if we were to join, then and we wanted to withdraw, then we would need to give 6 months' notice. There is no reference to penalties because there are none. The arrangements for withdrawal is that a member may resign with not less than 6 months' written notice, provided that the requirements of the Constitution and the agreement are met. No rebate of subscription will be given. So if you resign and the 6 months is in the year covered by the subscription, then you don't get a rebate. However, if the resignation period of 6 months was to go into the next financial period, you'd have to pay pro rata for the amount of the 6 months that was in the new period of time. So I haven't made reference to penalties because there are none. And I have made reference in paragraph 3.1, picking up the point that you did make to me informally, which was there should be a limited amount of time, and well, there should be a review period.
Councillor Barnett, and then Councillor Garland, you indicated again.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I couldn't let Councillor Perry's remarks go because he's obviously been reading too many newspaper stories. We welcome anyone at Millwall, even if they come from Maidstone.
Councillor Garland, I'll let the last words come to you.
Yeah, I think Councillor Fermor put it very well in saying that we need to counter some of the negative comments that are being said about this particular project. The other option is to do absolutely nothing whatsoever. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure Mr Green would back this up. £20,000 is a very small beer indeed when we're dealing with budgets of some £20-odd million for the council, or 18 million. So for £20,000, what do you get? You get to join an organisation that is well established, an organisation that has a track record of leaving in funding that we on our own cannot possibly hope to obtain. We also join an organisation that has businesses as part of it. We also join an organisation which there is an enterprise fund, of which the hospital is an example of, and we are part of that in any case. So the alternative is to do absolutely nothing whatsoever. My view, and I totally agree with the Chief Executive on this, is yes, we do go through budgetary constraints. Yes, we're moving 20,000, well, it's not 20,000, it's more like 50 or 60. But you have to be a proactive council within the financial realms of what you operate in. If you fail to be a proactive council, then you might as well not exist at all. So I can understand to a degree, a very small degree, some of the negative comments surrounding it, but ultimately we are a council. We are a council that wishes to be proactive. We are a council that values economic development and housing and regeneration as a whole. We have done for many years. And this is but another example and an opportunity which we could pursue to actually enhance that agenda that this council has pursued for some 15, 17 years. So to do nothing at all, I think, is a very retrograde step. And I fully support, with enthusiasm, the recommendations on the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Garland. And with that, the recommendations are on page 56. There's two recommendations. I'm going to ask you the same question. Do I need to read them out, or are you content that you've read them and understand them? And can I take them both together? Is that accepted? It is. Then may I have a show of hands, please, for the two recommendations on page 56? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. Abstentions? No, that's it, isn't it? That is then carried. Thank you very much. So if we move now directly to agenda item 15, which is on page 69 to 82, the Council Tax Base and Collection Fund Adjustment 2018 to 19. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. These two items were formerly dealt with in separate reports, but they've been brought together because they're similar in that they're both important elements in the budget setting process. First of all, the tax base. This represents the number of properties in the borough, and the CTB1 return, which is set out at Appendix 1, shows the position. The basic number of properties has gone up by 1.6% compared with last year, which is actually pretty close to the 1.5% that had been assumed in the neutral budget scenario that we had in the medium-term financial strategy. That 1.6% increase is then adjusted, as shown in the CTB1 return and in the report, for future growth above and beyond October this year, bad debts, discounts, the effect of the council tax support scheme. And we come up with a final figure of 60,921.6, which you're asked to agree, and that figure has been used in the strategic revenue projection, which is in the budget report later on in your agenda. And there are also individual projections for the tax base for each parish in parished areas, and those are set out in Appendix 2. The other thing that this report deals with is the collection fund adjustment, and this arises because inevitably our projection of council tax that we collect is going to be either too high or too low, hopefully not too different from the projection. So we end up with a surplus or a deficit on the collection fund, which is where council tax goes. And for this year, we're projecting a surplus of 808,879 for the year, and our share of that is 16%. The majority goes to Kent County Council. In total, taking into account the surplus brought forward from last year, we get an extra 228,000. The details are set out in Appendix 3. So that's good news. I haven't brought that into account in the strategic revenue projection because there's another element to the collection fund, which is from collecting business rates. And we normally finalise those figures at the end of January. And unfortunately, the pattern over the past couple of years is that whereas council tax has tended to be in surplus, business rates have been in deficit. Business rates are terribly difficult to project because of the number of appeals. So it may be that when I come back to P&R in February with the final budget proposals, we will have a surplus that we'll be able to bring into account, but I'm not taking anything for granted at this stage. So, to conclude, you're asked to agree the council tax base for next year, the figures for individual parishes, and the collection fund adjustment. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on that.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I don't want to nitpick, but is there any way in the recommendations we can make it clear, if we do go with this, that it's option 1 for the tax base and option 1 for the collection fund adjustment we want to go with, so we can see on the very front exactly what it is we're going to vote on?
Sorry? Yes? Is that the answer? You're okay.
Shall I just say, as set out? Would it deal with your point if it simply said, after the first recommendation, after Wilbury 6921.6, as set out in option 1? Yeah? Okay.
So that was you proposing that. Is somebody going to second that? Thank you, Councillor Firmer. Members, is that agreed? That it seems eminently sensible, doesn't it? Yes, come back again.
In that case, I'm happy to propose the whole thing as well, then, if that makes it easier.
So for each, to have that clarification on each part, is that? Oh, sorry. So please say it again so we get it.
In light of that, I'm happy to move all 3 recommendations on the report.
Not at all, thank you. I have nobody else indicating to speak. Once again, I'm going to ask if I can take... Can I take it as read that you understood the 3 recommendations, and can I take them all together? Yes? Could I have a show of hands then, please, for those with that amendment? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And then we move to agenda item 16 on page 89 to 93, and that's Mr Green again, the medium-term financial strategy. Just before Mr Green starts, the reason an urgent update was accepted was because that wasn't available when we went to print, because there was the need to have the meetings with each of the groups independently first, and what came out of that could be fed into the strategy proposals. That's why you've got the actual urgent update. So, Mr Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for bearing with me on late circulation of Appendix C, but it has been very useful presenting the proposals to the political groups. This report's the next step in the process of setting a budget for next year, following the agreement to the medium-term financial strategy at Council in October. And you'll remember that the medium-term financial strategy set out 3 sets of projections under favourable, neutral and adverse scenarios. And officers have developed proposals to address the neutral scenario and the adverse scenario. The neutral scenario has been updated to take account of changes that we know about that have arisen since the original medium-term financial strategy was prepared. And this is summarised in Appendix 1 on page 92. And this is showing, at the end of 5 years, a cumulative budget gap of 4.6 million. and this assumes that all existing budget savings, the ones that were agreed by Council back in March, are delivered, so that there is an assumption underlying that. Now, the budget proposals under the neutral scenario, which, as I say, I've been through with members, so I don't propose to go through in detail here, but happy to answer any questions on them, are set out in Appendix C, the schedule that was circulated separately. And if these proposals are accepted, ultimately by Council, where we will end up is a balanced position for next year and the year after, so 18-19 and 19-20. We still face a deficit in years 3, 4 and 5 of the planning period, but given that we would have reasonable confidence after the next couple of years, the proposal in the report is that we treat the adverse budget proposals as set aside for the time being. They're useful to have in our back pocket, as it were, should the position get worse. Obviously, we'll need to revisit the situation, certainly when we come to set a budget for next year. But the budget proposals in Appendix C, as set out on the bottom line there, show a balanced position for next year and the year after. And they do so without any real service cuts. Most of the things in there are about efficiency savings and further income generation. So, what you're asked to do is to agree the updated strategic revenue projection at Appendix A, and to agree the budget proposals for this committee specifically, which are the ones above the P&R subtotal on this schedule. And finally, to note that the other budget proposals will be going to the relevant service committees in January for them to comment, and then the whole lot will come back to this committee in February for you to agree a final set of proposals to go to Council. Thank you very much.
Councillor Garland.
I move the recommendations on the paper.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak, Councillor?
Just briefly, if I may. I'd like to see maybe some more emphasis on borrowing so that we can actually spend money. I mean, now interest rates are at their lowest, so it's probably a good time to actually invest in property, which can introduce revenue for the future. So I'd like to see an emphasis on that. But otherwise, I'm happy to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Green, did you wish to come back on that point?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. You'll see in the budget proposals that we have got quite significant savings or income coming from the housing and regeneration strategy and also from investments to promote economic development. Now, those are going to be funded by borrowing. We don't have any borrowing at the moment, but we will need to borrow probably from next year. So this is quite an ambitious set of proposals, and I think going to the limit of what it would be reasonable for us to go out and borrow in the market, I think to be even more ambitious would be risky because, I mean, delivering all of those housing schemes, buying property, there are risks associated with delivering the projects with investments in property. So this reflects a judgment about the right level of risk to take, and I think it would be wrong to think that we could just borrow more and more and generate yet more income.
Nobody else wishes to say anything, so can we move to the vote, please? A show of hands. That is unanimous. Just before I close the meeting, we had an earlier meeting tonight about improvements to systems, and I should have said in there, but I'd like the officers to take it away from here. It strikes me every time I talk about the recommendations that it really is a pain to read them all out, and you don't need it, but people watching don't actually know what they are. So I would like officers to take away a thought that perhaps looking at this, we have the screens in use so that we can actually flash those up, and it would also help us, I think, if we have amendments to recommendations, that is there. So if that can be taken away. And then, before I close the meeting, it just leaves me to wish you all, those I don't see again before Christmas, to wish you all a happy Christmas, prosperous and peaceful New Year, and of course a safe journey home tonight. Meeting is closed, members.